She thought the cowboy was asleep, but the moment his hand closed around her wrist, she realized he had heard every word. The cloth slips from her fingers and lands beside the fire. Warm lamplight flickers across cracked knuckles wrapped in fresh bandages. Outside, winter wind rattles the ranch windows, but inside the room, neither of them moves. His rough hand still holds her wrist. Her heart pounds so hard she can hear it. Then his eyes open, calm, awake, watching. And suddenly, one question hangs in the silence neither of them knows how to answer. If you love heartfelt Western romance stories, stay with us and share where you're watching from. Winter came early to Cedar Bluff that year. By the second week of November, snow already clung to the pine-covered slopes above the San Juan Mountains. The road leading into town had turned into a ribbon of frozen mud and wagon ruts. Travelers stopped talking about when winter would arrive and started talking about how long it might stay. Delilah Brooks arrived on a gray afternoon behind a supply wagon carrying sacks of flour, lamp oil, and fence staples. The stage station, where she had worked for nearly 2 years, had closed its doors 3 days earlier. The owner couldn't afford another winter. He paid what wages he could, handed her a recommendation letter, and wished her luck. Luck had brought her to Black Ridge Ranch. The ranch sat alone in a wide valley north of Cedar Bluff. Snow-covered fences stretched across the land. Smoke drifted from the chimney of the main house. Horses moved slowly inside distant corrals. Martha Green met her at the kitchen door. "You must be freezing," the older woman said. Delilah managed a small smile. "I've been colder." Martha chuckled and handed her a mug of coffee before asking another question. That small kindness stayed with Delilah longer than the warmth. The days that followed settled into a routine. She cleaned rooms, carried firewood, washed dishes, mended torn shirts. Most of the ranch hands barely noticed her. Neither did Wyatt Callahan. At least that was what she thought. The ranch owner left before sunrise and often returned after dark. He spoke little, ate quickly, worked harder than any man on the property. One evening a storm rolled through the valley, not a large one. Just enough wind to make the windows rattle. Wyatt returned late. Snow dusted his shoulders. His gloves were stiff with ice. He ate supper without a word and eventually settled into the long chair near the stone fireplace. The fire crackled softly. The rest of the house had gone quiet. When Delilah entered to collect empty dishes, she noticed something. Wyatt's hands. The skin across his knuckles had split open from cold weather and rope burns. Tiny streaks of dried blood marked the cracks. She paused. The man appeared asleep. His breathing was slow. The firelight danced across his face. Delilah hesitated before quietly crossing the room. From a cabinet near the kitchen, she found a small tin of salve Martha kept for burns and cuts. She brought warm water, a clean cloth, and knelt beside the chair. Carefully, slowly, she cleaned the dried blood from his hands. The cloth moved gently over skin hardened by years of work. Outside, wind pushed against the windows. Inside, only the fire made a sound. Delilah applied the salve and wrapped a strip of clean cloth around one cracked knuckle, then another. She shook her head softly. "No one should work themselves this hard alone," she whispered. The words had barely left her lips when a hand suddenly closed around her wrist. Delilah froze. Her breath caught. Wyatt's eyes were open, dark, awake, watching her. Neither spoke. The fire snapped inside the hearth. For a long moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, and for the first time in 4 long years, Wyatt Callahan felt something move inside a heart he thought winter had buried forever. Neither of them spoke. Delilah was the first to lower her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Callahan," she said softly. "I didn't mean to wake you." You didn't. His voice was rough from sleep, or perhaps from something else. He slowly released her wrist. Delilah stood at once and gathered the cloth, the tin of salve, and the bowl of water. Her hands moved quickly, almost nervously. I should get back to the kitchen. Wyatt nodded. Yet long after she disappeared through the doorway, he remained in the chair staring at the fresh bandages wrapped around his hands. No one had done something like that for him in years. Not since Clara. The fire burned low. Outside, snow tapped against the window. For the first time in a very long time, the house felt a little less empty. The next morning arrived cold and bright. Sunlight spilled across the valley like melted gold. The ranch hands were already feeding horses when Wyatt stepped from the house. His hands still carried Delilah's neat white wrappings. Several men noticed. None of them commented. But Wyatt noticed Martha Green watching from the kitchen window with a knowing look. He quickly turned away. Work waited. Work always waited. 3 days later, trouble arrived in the south stable. A valuable breeding stallion named Ranger refused feed and struggled for breath. The horse had been purchased the previous spring from a ranch near Durango. Wyatt had paid more money for that animal than some men earned in 2 years. Now Ranger stood trembling in his stall. 2 cowboys insisted the horse merely needed rest. Delilah paused while carrying a basket of folded laundry. She watched for a moment, then another. Something bothered her. She quietly set down the basket and stepped closer. The stallion's breathing rattled deep in his chest. Not loud, but wrong. Very wrong. Has he been coughing? She asked. One of the cowboys shrugged. A little. How long? A week, maybe? Delilah's expression changed. Mr. Callahan needs to see him. The men exchanged looks. One laughed lightly. He's just a horse. Delilah didn't laugh. When Wyatt arrived minutes later, she was standing beside the stall. The horse's nostrils flared. Its sides heaved. Delilah pointed toward the bedding. Small flecks of mucus stained the straw. Wyatt crouched beside the horse. His eyes narrowed. You've seen this before? She nodded. Back in Missouri. The ranch fell quiet around them. Wyatt looked at her for several seconds. Then he called for the veterinarian from Cedar Bluff. The doctor arrived that afternoon. After a long examination, he removed his spectacles and nodded. She's right. The older man glanced toward Delilah. Another week and this horse would have been in serious trouble. The stable became very quiet. Even the cowboys who had dismissed her looked uncomfortable. Delilah simply picked up her basket and returned to work. She didn't ask for thanks. That stayed with Wyatt more than the diagnosis. Later that evening, he found her hanging laundry near the back porch. The sun had already disappeared behind the mountains. Cold air drifted down from the peaks. You saved that horse. Delilah kept folding. I noticed something was wrong. You noticed what everyone else missed. She hesitated, then offered a small shrug. Horses can't tell you when they're hurting. Wyatt looked at her. Really looked at her. Not as an employee, not as someone passing through, as a person. A capable one. Delilah sensed his gaze and grew slightly uncomfortable. She folded the final shirt and carried the basket inside. But Wyatt remained standing there long after she was gone. A week later, he found himself checking the kitchen more often than necessary, listening for her footsteps, watching for small things, the way she always filled Martha's coffee cup before filling her own, the way she stopped to pet nervous horses, the way she thanked people even when they barely noticed her. Then came the night of the song. The moon hung above Black Ridge Ranch like a silver lantern. Snow covered the valley. Most of the ranch slept. Wyatt made his usual rounds before bed. The stable stood quiet beneath the stars. As he approached, he heard something. A voice, soft, almost a whisper. He stopped outside the door. Delilah sat on an overturned feed bucket near Ranger's stall. A lantern glowed beside her. She was mending a torn blanket while humming an old church hymn. The melody floated through the stable. Simple, unpolished, honest. The horses seemed calmer listening to it. Wyatt stood motionless. The song carried him backward through time, to another winter, another home. A woman singing while rocking a child near the fire. For years, those memories had felt sharp enough to wound him. Tonight they felt different, still sad, but warm, like a photograph touched by sunlight. When the final note faded, silence returned. Delilah looked up. For a moment she thought she had imagined the figure standing near the doorway. Then she recognized Wyatt. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. The lantern flickered. Somewhere outside, wind moved through the pines, and miles away in Cedar Bluff, another pair of eyes had begun watching Black Ridge Ranch. Beatrice Holloway folded a letter and slid a silver coin across a table. "Find out everything about the new girl," she said. The man nodded, and the first shadow quietly entered Delilah Brooks's path. Winter tightened its grip on the mountains. By January, snow stood waist-deep along parts of the trail between Cedar Bluff and Black Ridge Ranch. The pine branches sagged under heavy white blankets. Even the river below the ridge moved slower beneath sheets of ice. The storm arrived before dawn. Martha noticed it first. The kitchen windows rattled while coffee boiled on the stove. By breakfast, the sky had disappeared completely. Wind drove snow across the valley in long white waves. Every hand on the ranch knew what that meant. Move the horses. Move them now. Wyatt spent the morning in the saddle alongside his men, guiding the herd toward lower shelter near the south barns. Snow collected on his coat and hat. The cold bit through leather gloves and wool. The work stretched into afternoon. Back at the ranch house, Delilah helped Martha secure shutters and stack extra firewood beside the kitchen door. Then she heard something. A stable hand burst through the doorway. "We lost sight of Willow." Delilah looked up. Willow was a young mare, gentle, strong, due to foal within weeks. The ranch hand shook snow from his shoulders. She got separated near Red Creek Gulch. Wyatt was still miles away with the main herd. The hand grabbed another coat and hurried outside. Delilah stood frozen for only a second. Then she reached for her own coat. Martha saw immediately. "No, she won't survive out there. Neither will you." Delilah tied her scarf tighter. "Someone has to try." The wind swallowed her the moment she stepped outside. Snow struck her face like handfuls of sand. She followed hoof prints where she could find them. Sometimes they vanished completely. Sometimes she dropped to one knee just to see the trail beneath drifting snow. The world became white sky and white ground. Nothing else. Then she heard it. A faint whinny. Ahead. Beyond a stand of twisted pines, Willow stood trapped against a rocky slope, trembling and exhausted. Relief flashed across Delilah's face. "Easy, girl." The mare answered with another weak sound. Slowly, patiently, Delilah worked her toward safer ground. But the journey back was longer, harder. The storm had grown worse. Hours passed. Darkness settled over the mountains. At Black Ridge Ranch, lanterns glowed in every window. Wyatt had returned. So had every horse except one. And every person except Delilah. His stomach dropped. The stable hand finally confessed what had happened. Wyatt did not waste a single second. Within minutes, he was back on horseback with 2 lanterns tied to the saddle. Snow hammered his face as he searched. The valley seemed endless. Then, near midnight, he saw movement. A horse. Willow, and beside her, half buried in snow, lay a small figure. Delilah! He was off the horse before it fully stopped. She was breathing, barely. Snow covered her coat and hair. Her hands were cold even through her gloves. Without hesitation, Wyatt lifted her into his arms. She felt frighteningly light. The ride home seemed longer than any trail he had ever traveled. Back at the ranch, Martha rushed blankets to the parlor. The doctor was sent for immediately. As the fire blazed higher, Delilah drifted in and out of fevered sleep. Her lips moved. At first the words made no sense. Then Wyatt heard them clearly. Please. A pause. A trembling breath. Please don't leave me behind. The room fell silent. Wyatt sat beside her chair. The storm roared outside. But those 5 words stayed with him long after the doctor arrived, because they sounded less like a dream, and more like an old wound that had never healed. The storm finally passed on the 4th day. Sunlight returned to the valley in pale bands across the snow. Icicles hung from the roof of Black Ridge Ranch. The world looked peaceful again. But inside the house, nothing felt quite the same. Delilah slept through most of the next morning. The fever had broken. The doctor from Cedar Bluff packed his bag near the front door and buttoned his coat. She'll recover, he told Wyatt. She needs rest. Wyatt nodded. He had heard the same thing twice already. Still, he walked back to the parlor and sat beside the chair where Delilah slept. A cup of untouched coffee cooled beside him. The ledger he had intended to review remained closed. Hours passed. He barely noticed. Late that afternoon, Delilah finally opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the fire. The second was Wyatt. He was sitting nearby with a newspaper folded in his lap. When he noticed she was awake, he stood immediately. You scared half the ranch? A faint smile touched her lips. Only half? His shoulders relaxed. The smallest sign of relief crossed his face. For a few quiet days, life settled into a fragile peace. Then the rumors began. At first, they traveled slowly. A whisper in the general store, a comment outside the church, a conversation cut short when someone approached. By the following week, everyone in Cedar Bluff seemed to have heard a different version of the same story. The Maid was trying to trap Wyatt Callahan. The Maid wanted the ranch. The Maid planned to become mistress of Black Ridge. Delilah heard none of it directly. Not at first. Then she walked into Parker's Mercantile one afternoon to buy thread and lamp wicks. 2 women near the fabric counter stopped talking the moment she entered. A third offered a smile that never reached her eyes. Delilah knew that kind of silence. She had known it her whole life. When she returned to the ranch, she carried the supplies upstairs and quietly shut her bedroom door. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. The small room held little: a narrow bed, a wash basin, a wooden chair, a trunk containing everything she owned. The next evening, she began folding clothes into it. Carefully, quietly, without tears. Martha found her first. The older woman stood in the doorway and stared. You aren't serious? Delilah kept folding. I think it's time. Martha sighed heavily. Running won't stop people from talking. No. Delilah closed the trunk. But it might stop them from talking about him. The word spread through the ranch faster than wildfire. By sunset, Wyatt was standing outside her room. His knock came soft. Delilah opened the door. Neither spoke immediately. The hallway lamp flickered between them. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Delilah lowered her eyes. I should have gone weeks ago. Wyatt stepped inside. For the first time since she arrived, anger showed plainly on his face. Not anger at her. Anger at the situation, at the town, at himself. You nearly died saving one of my horses. That doesn't change anything. It changes everything." The words came out harder than he intended. Silence followed. Then softer, quieter, almost painful to say aloud, he added, "Stay." Delilah looked up. The single word hit her harder than any speech. Wyatt Callahan was not a man who asked for much, certainly not twice. Yet here he stood, asking for her. Before she could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside. A wagon rolled into the yard. An hour later, the entire household gathered in the dining room. An elderly man sat at the long table. His coat carried the dust of a long journey. Judge Nathaniel Carter removed a weathered wooden box from beneath his arm. Its brass corners were worn smooth with age. He placed it carefully on the table. "Miss Brooks," he said, "I've spent 15 years trying to find you." The room fell silent. Delilah stared. Inside the box lay old deeds, letters, maps, documents tied with faded ribbon. Judge Carter opened one packet and slid it across the table. The signature at the bottom belonged to her father. Her hands began to tremble. What followed sounded impossible. 20 years earlier, her father had saved the life of a mining investor caught in a mountain accident. The grateful man later transferred ownership of a small valley containing one of the strongest natural springs in the region. The property had been left in trust for Delilah. No one spoke. Even Wyatt seemed unable to move. Then came the final revelation. Judge Carter removed another document. His expression darkened. "Someone has been attempting to claim the land." Sheriff Owen Pierce stepped forward. He had arrived moments earlier. "And we now know who." The sheriff placed forged paperwork on the table. One name appeared again and again: Beatrice Holloway. The room went still. The rumors, the investigation, the whispers. None of it had been about love. It had been about land and water. Enough water to make a fortune in a valley where every ranch depended on snowmelt. The truth had finally surfaced. Yet when everyone looked toward Delilah, expecting relief, they found something else. She quietly closed the lid of the wooden box, then looked toward the packed trunk waiting beside the stairs. The decision in her eyes had not changed, and Wyatt suddenly realized that even the truth might not be enough to make her stay. The days that followed passed quietly. Too quietly. Snow began to melt along the lower trails. Water dripped from barn roofs during the afternoon and froze again after sunset. Cedar Bluff was slowly pulling itself out of winter. Inside Black Ridge Ranch, Delilah packed the last of her belongings. She thanked Martha for every meal. She thanked the ranch hands for their kindness. She even walked through the south stable one final time and rested her hand on Willow's neck. The mare nudged her shoulder gently. Delilah smiled, then looked away. The morning she planned to leave arrived clear and cold. A stagecoach bound for Durango stopped in Cedar Bluff every Thursday. Her trunk sat loaded onto a wagon before sunrise. What surprised her most was Wyatt. He never came. No goodbye. No argument. No last request. Nothing. By noon, disappointment had settled into a place she did not want to examine too closely. Perhaps this was better. Perhaps it was easier. The wagon rolled toward town. The mountains stood blue against the horizon. The wheels creaked over frozen ruts. Delilah kept her eyes fixed ahead. When they reached Cedar Bluff, something felt strange. The streets were unusually crowded. Shopkeepers stood outside their doors. Families gathered near the center of town. Even the blacksmith had abandoned his forge. People were moving toward the large assembly hall near the church. "What happened?" Delilah asked. No one seemed to know. Only that Sheriff Owen Pierce had asked everyone to gather. A few minutes later, the hall filled with nearly every resident in Cedar Bluff. Voices echoed beneath the wooden rafters. Boots scraped across the floorboards. Then silence spread through the room. The front doors opened. Wyatt Callahan stepped inside. He wore his black coat, the same coat he reserved for funerals, church services, and matters of importance. His eyes searched the crowd, found Delilah, stayed there. For a moment, neither moved. Then Wyatt walked forward, past merchants, past ranchers, past Beatrice Holloway standing stiff near the back wall, past Sheriff Owen, past Judge Nathaniel Carter, until he stood directly in front of Delilah. The entire hall seemed to disappear. Only the two of them remained. Wyatt cleared his throat. He was a man comfortable around storms, comfortable around cattle, comfortable around hardship. Speaking before a room full of people was another matter entirely, yet he did it anyway. "This woman saved one of my horses," his voice carried clearly. Heads turned toward Delilah. "Then she saved another." A few ranch hands nodded. Wyatt continued. "She saved my ranch more than once." Silence deepened. His gaze never left her. And somewhere along the way, he stopped briefly, as if choosing words carefully. "She saved something I thought was gone forever." Several people lowered their eyes. Even Beatrice remained silent. Wyatt took one step closer. "My heart." Delilah felt tears gathering before she could stop them. "I don't care what rumors people believed." His voice grew steadier. "I don't care what anyone expected." He reached into his coat pocket. The room held its breath. Then Wyatt Callahan dropped to one knee. A gasp moved through the crowd. Not inside a church, not inside his ranch house, not hidden from the world. Right there, in the very town where the whispers had begun. "Delilah Brooks," he said, "I don't need this town's permission." A faint smile touched his face. "I only need your answer." The hall stood perfectly still. Outside, wind moved softly through the streets. Inside, no one dared speak. "You walked into Black Ridge Ranch carrying nothing but a suitcase and more courage than most people I've ever known." His voice lowered. "You cared for my horses. You cared for my home. You cared for me." The emotion he usually buried showed plainly now. "I don't want another season without you." Tears slipped down Delilah's cheeks. Wyatt extended his hand. "Will you marry me?" The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 3. Then Delilah laughed through her tears. A small, trembling laugh. The kind born from relief after carrying something heavy for too long. "Yes." The word barely rose above a whisper. Yet everyone heard it. A smile broke across Wyatt's face. The first real smile many people in Cedar Bluff had ever seen. Applause erupted around them. Martha wiped her eyes. Sheriff Owen grinned openly. Even several ranchers who had once believed the rumors joined in. As Wyatt stood, Delilah placed her hand in his. Neither wanted to let go. Later that evening, after the crowd dispersed, Judge Nathaniel Carter approached quietly. He carried a single envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. The seal was cracked. "Your father asked that this be given to you if I ever found you." Delilah opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was faded but clear. She read silently, then stopped. Her hand trembled. Wyatt looked at her. "Oh, what is it?" Tears filled her eyes again. She handed him the letter. One line stood out among the others. "You will someday meet a man who sees your worth before he ever learns what you own." Wyatt read the sentence twice, then looked at Delilah. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. 1 year later, beneath tall pine trees overlooking the valley, they were married. The same mountains stood watch over them. The same wind crossed the ridges. Willow, the mare Delilah had saved, led the small wedding procession. Martha cried openly. Sheriff Owen laughed louder than anyone else. Judge Carter stood proudly near the front row. And when the ceremony ended, Wyatt and Delilah paused on a hill overlooking Black Ridge Ranch. The ranch no longer felt haunted by loss. Smoke rose from the chimney. Horses moved peacefully across green pasture. A new season had arrived. Neither of them said much. The morning sun climbed above the San Juan Mountains. A breeze stirred the grass. Somewhere below, a horse whinnied softly. Wyatt slipped his hand into Delilah's. She squeezed it gently. Together, they watched the light spread across the valley. After the longest winter of their lives, spring had finally returned. And maybe that's why this story stays with us. Not because of the ranch, not because of the land, not even because of the wedding beneath the pines. It stays with us because, at some point in life, most of us become a little like Wyatt, or a little like Delilah. Maybe you've known what it feels like to lose something you thought you could never replace. Maybe you've carried a hurt so long that it became part of who you were. Or maybe you've stood in a room full of people and wondered whether anyone truly saw your worth. If you had been standing on that porch beside them, watching the sun rise over the San Juan Mountains, would you have believed that healing was still possible? What I love most about their story is that neither of them rescued the other with grand promises. It happened through small things: a bandaged hand, a quiet song, a choice to stay, a choice to trust. Sometimes the deepest kind of love arrives that way, not loudly, but steadily, until it becomes the place we finally call home. Perhaps that's the lesson hidden in this valley. Life can take more from us than we ever imagined. But as long as we keep our hearts open, there is still room for another sunrise. I'd love to know, what moment in Wyatt and Delilah's journey touched you the most? And if stories of second chances, enduring love, and healing hearts speak to something inside you, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more trails ahead, many more lives to discover, and many more unforgettable Western love stories waiting just beyond the next horizon.